being to this point where we can actually say that we have a DMC coordinator, and it's just not the talk of having a DMC coordinator. We physically have one. And I think it's going to really give us an opportunity to fast track. The committee has done quite a few things to point a direction that we can understand what the numbers are saying. But now is our opportunity to get more numbers and understand what's happening with DMC and to truly address the disproportionate minority contact with young people in the juvenile justice system. This is just the beginning, and I'm really excited. I'm really pleased that you're all here. And the only thing I have left to say is go team. Let's go.
And I hope I do okay here. From a JDI perspective, I think you guys have all kind of figured out there's 8 core strategies in JDAI, but we know this core strategy is what really moves change in jurisdictions. If we could figure out across our country why children and families of color enter all of our systems, as much as people say we don't want to talk about money, I can't even guess the millions, if not billions probably, we would save our country if we could figure out what it is that is happening to our, presented in every system that we have. So as far as JDAI is concerned, we have 8 core strategies, but we understand that this is the one that if we can figure this out, will actually move the dial, will change the numbers, will give our kids and families better lives in the situations that their kids might have to be involved with us, but we can do better at the work we're doing. And I think, and Levon and Mark had talked too about this committee. And I know it feels a lot of times like we come here every month and we talk and we talk and we talk and we talk, and it doesn't feel like sometimes we're getting a lot of outcomes or that we're making change. And so one of their commitments to this year is it's hard. It's hard to be a co-chair of these committees. It's hard to remember to CC 35 people on every single thing that's happening. And I know sometimes in a committee it feels like you're not involved. And that's definitely not the intent. It's not the case here. And I just want you all to know that this has been on your work plan for 2 years. Most of the time I have been here, you guys put this on your work plan. The first year that I was here, there was a lot of discussion about if this should be on the work plan. Was it too big of a goal? And so I think today is important for this committee. It feels like we talk a lot, and we do. We know, like we always say, hey, you want to go out at night and have beers and talk about race, equity, and inclusion? It's one of my favorite topics. But in this meeting, we talk about it for change. And so for this committee, this is a big success for you guys. I think Mark's right. Go team.
And we would not be here today if it was not for the support of the Douglas County Commissioners and the Administrator. And I will tell you from my conversations with them, even with talking to Patrick sometime one-on-one, there's always been a strong commitment to getting this done. The Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Bergeson could not be here today because they're at another meeting, but they did want me to express the fact that they're happy to welcome Ajamal, they're happy to welcome the work, and they're committed as ever to getting this done. With that, I will turn it over to Patrick to introduce our speaker.
So at first I just want to say that, first of all, not all of you probably know who I am. So I'm Patrick Bloomingdale, I'm the Douglas County Administrator. I've been an administrator for 5 years, but I've been with the county for 25 years. So I did start when I was 12.
I'm proud of you.
Like I said, Doogie House at JD. But there was 162 applicants for the position of DMC coordinator, and I went through each one of them individually. It took me a long time, but I was really excited when Ajamal,
Right.
I want to get that wrong. Ajamal applied, because I really felt like in the last year or so I've gotten a chance to see him at work as he's participated in the OIS and the policy group meeting he comes to, and I just felt like he stood out as the person that's best positioned to lead this effort. Collaboratively, I think he plays well with others in the best way, but is not afraid to get into the muck and do what he's got to do to get people on board. I mean, this is a monumental task. I think the hardest thing from my perspective, and I am a lay person, you know way more about this than I do, and I told you this yesterday, is getting people who are in positions of power and influence particularly older white guys like me, to see that, you know, I think the mantra I hear from some people is, well, the reason there's so many people of color in the system is because that's where all the crime occurs, is in North Omaha and South Omaha. And, you know, things happen in North and South Omaha, but things also happen in other parts of the community. And it's a cop-out to say that that's the reason why. And to get people to say, look, we're not demonizing you because you grow up with a certain experience and you see things in a certain light, and a lot of times it's subconscious. You don't even realize that you have two people with this charge of the same crime, one's white, one's black or Latino, and they get treated differently. And a lot of times not because you're racist, it's because you see things through a certain lens, and you may not even know that you're seeing it through that lens. So we got to get people to understand that doesn't make you a bad person necessarily. It just makes you, we just need to help you get educated on what the issues are and how we can address it. And I think that Jamal is best positioned as much as anybody to help lead that conversation. So thank you for applying and thank you for accepting. And
Sure.
I'm excited about the potential we have going forward.
Thank you.
Judith, do you have a couple words you want to say
Oh.
before he speaks?
Oh, well,
You probably
okay.
work with him the closest right now.
Well, I certainly haven't known Ajmal the longest, as some of you have here in this room, but he's certainly made a huge impact on my life since I first met him. I mean, like the very first day I met him. And it was really interesting because we were at a meet. You know, we had come together. There were three of us, you know, and just to kind of sit down and talk for a minute. And Ajmal, as he always does, you know, asks some kind of the hard questions. And so he asked a question of our organization, and me being fairly new to the organization at that time, you know, just kind of said what I saw. And it was kind of shocking to the other person that was there, but it was true, you know, and I think that that's what Ajmal brings. You know, he asks the questions that make you want to think about what you're really feeling. You know, what is really going on, and I think that's really important, and I think it's important for this organization, and I'm excited that he's going to be our leader in this effort, and make a little bit of noise, and you know, get people doing and thinking in the right way. You know, as we go in our careers, you know, we always go and do as much as we can everywhere we are, and he certainly has done a lot for NFC, now Promise Ship, and we really appreciate that because he really did change the culture, I think, you know, for us and got us on the right track, and I'm grateful for that, and just have to, you've left me there, so I guess I'll just have to keep going. But thank you, Ajmal.
Thank you. Well, how much time do I get now? Is there...
Soliloquy.
We want you to be able to make your presentation, allow everybody to ask questions.
Sure, okay. No,
As well.
well, let me start off. Some of you know that I spent 2 years in the Peace Corps in Botswana, and there's all kinds of expressions they throw out at you. And when you leave the house, usually the parents will say to the kids, remember the name. They say it in the language. And basically they're saying, don't go there and embarrass us. In other words, and my wife tells me that all the time when I go out sometime, don't embarrass the family. And so she says, sometimes you'll say things that sometimes you just keep to yourself. Like, I don't like wearing ties that much. And I like getting them on sale at different places, like at 24th and Q Street, and every now and then I get some at Walgreens.
You don't have to wear them, by the way.
Oh, okay. So she says, don't tell people that story, whatever. But one of the things I want to share here, and I think one of the issues that I hopefully I bring to this conversation, level of humility, having grown up in the community and seeing that, and particularly spent many years with Table Talk, and just seeing there are a lot of great people in our city who really want to do more, but institutionally, many of our institutions don't do that. They don't facilitate that. And so I'm one of the kind of persons, and some of you may not know France Fanon, but he has a book. He died back in 1961. He was from Martinique. And he has a phrase where he says, make me a man to question. And so one of the things I've discovered, particularly from my career, is that I can get away with asking questions if I do it in a respectful way. And so I think that's one of the things I want to share here that's very important. The other thing that I've learned growing up here in this community is that some of us are really afraid to talk about race and class issues. And having been a person who's been racialized, growing up here and growing up poor, I know how important it is to have people who speak to those issues. And so one of the things I really admired about my 25 years at Catholic Charities is I got to push buttons and get paid for it. Again, it's about the same issues of doing that. And I will say up front, I do give people that opportunity to say sometime in our conversations, it's on the record or off the record. If it's on the record, we get to repeat this, particularly when we're talking about doing the work of the public and the people at the bottom. So I think we need to do that and be about that. I'm sometimes put in pain when I'm in meetings and there are people who you know have great ideas and they won't say what they need to say. And particularly when we live in a country where we have democracy, and particularly in this time and so on. So I want us to be very much involved in the partnership, but also look at those numbers and say, why is that? Now, some of you don't know that this is closer to home than most of y'all may know, but I have a son who actually got caught up in the juvenile justice system. He's not a lawyer, but when he was and I can repeat the story now because he gave me permission, but he was in Northwest High. He was like a 4.0 A student, and he was doing pretty good and everything, and he had a job. I'm not going to mention the place called Best Buy, but he actually stole a tape recorder or a CD player, and he had the same one in his car. And to make a long story short, he had to go through the system. And I must say at that time, Judge Johnson was around and Judge Daniel was the prosecutor at the time. And they basically said he can go through diversion. And that's my first experience with the criminal system or criminal justice system for you. But to make a long story short, he had to write an apology for the accepting in law school or something like that. And he was supposed to have sealed records. And I know that they made I would say they made a different kind of exception because both my wife and I are middle income families, and again, we were not your typical type of family in some regards. But I saw how that system worked, that someone can show you a bit of grace and it can make a difference in the world. They looked at his grade point average and saw he had this, like he just did a boneheaded thing, and that happens. But what bothered me is how that record followed him for a while when it was not supposed to be following him. So this is why I think this is so important for all of us, because the question we ask ourselves, what if it was our children, our child? And I think that's the measure of our community and what we're about. And one of the things I do say up front is that we got to begin to challenge these institutions ourselves to speak truth to power. Now, one of the things that I'm really somewhat saddened by, and I'm not going to mention the meeting I go to every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, but it is painful to sit in a meeting where there's so many opportunities to take it to another level and people don't. And I want to bear witness to that. But at the same time, I want to call people in, not call them out. And I think if we're going to make the changes in this system, we're going to have to do, as one of my colleagues at NFC or Promiseship said, we got to leave our fingerprints in that organization. And particularly for that next generation that is not yet born, as they say in that African novel, the beautiful one's not yet born. So part of what our struggle is about is what we want to be, what we want Omaha to look like, or Nebraska, the fact that we've passed through this wormhole. So I'm going to stop there with just 2 quick points I want to make. One of the things I always do when I walk in a room is I look around and I look at the racial makeup or people who may be from a certain income level, and I ask myself, how often are they invited to the tables? So in a democracy and an open system, if all things being equal, we should show some sense of participation of our citizens and people in our communities. And I think that if we don't have that, then I think it calls upon us individually and collectively to do it. But I also know that the team that plays together the best oftentimes wins the Super Bowl. That's just how it works. And too often we have not won Super Bowls in our community because sometimes there's so much disagreement and ego problems in our respective domains. So we have to begin to pull back and so on. Now, I want you to know, Fred, as a kid, when I was hungry and poor, I never got an award. And as I grew up, I made a pledge I would never take an award. I like to share this story. But one day, my wife told me, when you were unemployed and you left Catholic Church, you should take that award. It might help you get a job. So I did take one award from the Rotary Club or something like that, but it didn't help me get a job because I got it. But
That's why we hired you.
I didn't take the award. But I will say, there was a time, there was an Ike Freeman award that was worth $1,000, and I turned it down. And boy, did I catch holy whatever at home for turning that down. But again, it was about principle. And again, as my mother used to say to us, you shouldn't get an award when you're doing the work every day. And sometimes when you're struggling in this community, you see people who get all these awards. It's somewhat disheartening because, as you know, there are a lot of great people in our community who do work and don't take credit for it. We got a lot of unsung heroes in this community. And you don't necessarily see them in the media and so on. So I think part of what I see myself in this role is not only a person who helped push the envelope, but to convene people. And that's something that's so important. Sometimes we don't take credit for just bringing good people in the room. And I found that during table talk. I met some wonderful people over the years in the city who got in the room, and all of a sudden their story became our story, and my story became their story. So it's in that spirit I throw out to you that we need to continue to challenge our system. And my grandfather used to say to me and say to us is, boy, manners will take you places that money won't. So if you show people a sense of respect, humility, they will show the same thing to you. And that's one of the reasons why I speak highly of my experience in Botswana and in the community, not only in North and South Omaha, but elsewhere. Because I'm the kind of guy who will talk to any and everyone, because I know there is a connectedness, as Native Americans say so often, to all my relatives out there. So we really need to be about doing that, reversing the situation in this community. And I'm going to stop there because I'm looking at that clock move fast when I talk. So thank you.
Opportunity now for people to ask Ajamal about his vision, or wearing a tie, where he got it from.
You remember that, huh? Otherwise, don't embarrass us.
I just want to say that a lot of people probably don't know this, but Ajamal, he makes reference to his mom. She was part of this 1-2 knockout punch, Shropshire Johnson, that helped in the segregated school system in Omaha Public School. His mom was a person that when she walked into a room, when she left, you knew she was there. Miss Johnson she was something else. And I first met him, we argued, we were like on the opposite sides. Like I threatened to choke him.
And I wrote a hot letter too in the article, yeah.
And I wrote you back and told you what I thought about that letter. I wrote that letter too.
That's
But
true.
it was in the course of that we decided we had more in common than difference. And we've been working together ever since. Not always agreeing, but we work together very well. So any questions about DMC?
How are you gonna fix it, Ajamal?
Oh, wow. I got a magical wand. You know what I found fascinating, Patrick, when I went to Lincoln a couple weeks ago, and I saw the people in the room, and there were some statistics and data and so on, but I left before the meeting ended. But what I think the way we fix it is we got to continue to put the information out there. And I think there are a lot of people who don't know things. And again, I had a colleague say it to me, sometimes people don't know better. And he put it in such a way that we have to bring that to people's attention. But even if they don't do it, then I think collectively we got to keep pushing back. Because I think at the end of the day, when you look at young people being relegated to the school to prison pipeline, it's upon all of us. People's babies and children that were not that way. So I think collectively, I use the word we, and I know I didn't create the situation by myself, but I think at the end of the day, if we're all at the table, I think we can solve it. Because I think if you believe in it, it can happen by the fact of, even use the word faith here. And it is that belief system. So I think we can push back, because I don't think Nebraska and Omaha, Douglas County is any different than any other communities in this country and elsewhere. So the more we continue to own it collectively, because I think it's sometimes painful, and I use the metaphor, there are some of us who go and shovel the snow, or shovel up the snow, and people walk up and give credit you've done that. So the more we keep pushing back that, we stand on other people's shoulders and we didn't do it by ourselves, I think we can do it. Because I use examples of the kids and people I've known. And I also say that as a kid growing up in Omaha, there were a lot of guys who were much smarter than me. And they did not achieve because they didn't have some of the support system. So again, when you have people who take no prisoners for social justice, who refuse to let you fail, then that's how we transform our system. So folks, it's about transformation. And again, I believe not only in individual transformation, but institutional. And if I can't leave my thumbprint, I ain't gonna be working there. That's just the reality. So I think we can do it. And again, at some point, someone's gotta ask you that tough question. And sometimes I don't like to look in that mirror either. But every now and then somebody can say, oh, Jamal, you're not even following what you just got through talking about. Bam.
What were some of the changes that you made at NFC or Promise?
Oh, that slipped out of me to say that. One, I gotta give them
Good thing I'm sitting by
credit.
you.
Yeah. One, I gotta give them credit. They allowed me to do an 8-hour culture military training for all staff manager. Not all the people at the top went through it, I'll say that. But to be able to talk things out. Now, some of you don't know this, but I don't do profanity. I mean, I'm very adamant about that. So if I'm in the workplace or in school, I can call people out because that's how I was socialized. So that's another issue that you don't see that happening oftentimes, and people being mean-spirited about people we serve. How can we serve low-income families or people who are in trouble or destitute, whatever, and we're going to call them all these names that we hear? And so if you're at work, that's another issue. And it sounds maybe trivial, but I think it sets the tone of how we are supposed to be, as Robert Greenleaf said, leader servants. So that was it. The third thing is, I was an African-American guy in the room. And sometimes you have to bear witness to have somebody in the room. And I remember one day, and I like to share this, they were having this wonderful conversation about racism. and they were just running that train up the track. I had to raise my hand and say, no, now the African-American guy is gonna speak. They looked at me like I was crazy. But we cannot own other people's agendas sometimes. Again, I wanna speak for women, but I don't wanna talk to women. You follow me? How does that work? So that's another thing. And then the other thing, folks, is integrity. I think there's a sense of integrity. You know, if I don't walk up and down and do this and that, then I can talk of that. And again, I think one of the things that it's difficult in a large institution to make change. But some of that I can't even measure because I'm not going to be there to see some of it. But I do know that when people go to the exit interview, they would come and share things with me. And I would sometimes relay that to folks, and they would ask me to give them a sense of anonymity. Again, I'm pushing that. We shouldn't have to have people go through an exit interview who they're afraid to say things because of repercussions. But how do we push back? And then, of course, kind of teach people that you can sometimes write letters on your private time and still have principles and work at the same organization. So part of it I think we got to do is not only do we exercise our right, and what I've done at Promiseship is there are things they may disagree with, but they cannot take my democratic rights. And I think more of us needed to give citizens and people that opportunity to challenge our systems. Whoever thought we would have the person we have in the White House? But I don't blame that person. I blame us collectively for not always pushing back. So I think that would be the major thing that I've loved. But I think for more than anything, I think they're gonna have to measure that. And when folks come in that door who may look different than them, then that's the real measure of how they treat them and how they are advocates to make sure that those fathers get their kids back by virtue of the fact that some people may dislike fathers, things like that. But I think part of it is just calling people out. When I use the word call them out, I mean calling them in. Because if you have a sense of respect and you see growth in all of us, then you really want to continue to work with that person. But I won't know the final chapter until we see some of the things that get implemented, particularly in the absence when I'm not there to look over somebody's shoulder. But again, I think organizations, and I will say this, you need to have somebody in your organization who's going to question all the time. You may not like the question, but if it's done respectfully, you get to do it. So I think that's one of the major things I've done historically in my career.
You know, I don't know you very well. I remember my first meeting, sitting in a room listening to you talk, and I said, "Who is this guy?" And I said, I like what I hear, but I don't want to like him, and I couldn't figure it out for a long time.
I don't want to like you. Did y'all hear that?
And that's for real. And every meeting that I've ever sat and listened to you, the thing about, and I say this to my business partners and my staff all the time, you have to ask the questions that need to be asked. And you're repeating that, and I just feel that that's so true. So I'm excited about your opportunity and the committee's opportunity to get to know you a little better.
Good, thank you, appreciate that. I hope you like me a little bit better now.
Well, I'm gonna say, when I met you, I liked you because you ruffle feathers like me. So you remind me a lot of myself and a man, but I'm a woman because I don't use profanity. I think you're supposed to hold yourself to a higher standard. So when I met you, I said, oh, I'm not the only one who's ruffling feathers. So maybe I can speak up a little bit more because since I'm in this uniform, I can't really say what I want to say because I'm representing the police department, but we can have outside conversations when I could just represent Vivian Buckley because, like you, they never see eye to eye with me.
Right.
And I always say, I've never been welcomed to the police department. I'm the stepchild, and I'm still knocking at the door after 27 years.
Right.
Can I please come in now? So I'm still out there, but I got 3 more years left, and again, welcome to the environment that you've already been in, so hopefully we can make some change.
Good, thank you. You know, there's something else that hit me as you said that, Vivi. I find it amazing the number of our people, and I learned this more so in college, these people who are committed to principles and issues where they do social justice work. And I find it sometimes painfully sad when some of us retire, we still don't stay involved. And I know I study gerontology, the more people stay engaged at older age, the longer they live.
Oh, she's gonna stay involved because she and I are already working on
Yeah,
it.
she's
Okay.
She's forcing me.
Okay, that's what, but I say that, I think we got to do a better job collectively in our communities of bringing people in. And then the other thing I think is probably the most important here, folks, many of the people who we've sometimes discounted, I learned this so much, and Phil knows this from the St. Martin days in Juan Diego. When you ask people who you serve to volunteer, they're excited. And in the Christmas giving program, we used to have like 650 families or more in there. In order to get in there, you had to go to a community meeting, you had to write a letter, and you name it. Lavon's very much heard from our community forums, but it is a very powerful experience when you got the very people we call the meek or the salt of the earth, where they're at the table determining their own destinies. And so I think one of the things I love to see, and I keep arguing about this, we got to bring more people who don't know about some of these stories around this table and help us do what we got to do. Because I really think it's very important, even when we retire, we move away, there's still some things you want to give back to. So we got to continue to bring folks into the door. So I'm looking forward to us doing more of that.
And actually, I agree with what Ajmal said, because what unfortunately, what we're starting to see, at least when the young ladies volunteered for the Christmas program, they did feel a sense of ownership versus just, okay, I'm gonna fill this paperwork and that's it, you give me my gifts. And there are certain entities that still have that in place, and even though our precinct partners with one of the entities that does that, you know, I go back to the Catholic Charities days that the women took that seriously. It's just like, I have to get my volunteer hours in, then I can turn in my paperwork, and then this is what I can fill out for my kids. So I really appreciated that accountability, and to be honest, I think in some aspects you really need to bring it back, because just because you're poor doesn't mean there's not something that you can offer, or something that you can contribute, or somewhere you can volunteer and make a difference as well.
Hey, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
Huh?
Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, sure, I mailed it off. Yeah, okay, I mailed it off.
Real quick, I will just say, you all know the F word's my favorite word. It is possible to work with Ajmal, be friends with Ajmal, and not use profanity and get things done. It's a verb, it's a noun, it's whatever.
Yeah, working for the police department, I could probably pay for a car, a mortgage, and everything else if I had a cuss bucket running around.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
My family owned a bar. And once I went into child welfare, everybody's like, "Where'd you get this mouth? You didn't have this mouth." When you know, the whole time I bartended. Yeah, it was this child welfare workers taught me these words. Social workers.
We had a situation come up that was brought to our attention about a misperception about the role of DMC and what DMC was in the community as it relates to an issue that Patrick brought up about the Patrick brought to our attention about the balance between helping to eradicate DMC and balancing with public safety and law enforcement. So we, the issue was brought to our attention. We invited the police. They came. We both learned from each other about what DMC is, what it isn't, and then what the perception of word on the street was about. How do you see yourself working with the police department and balancing the need to address DMC with balancing public safety and addressing some of the factors of the overrepresentation or the over-involvement of our youth?
You know, I so often, even when they were writing the press release, they alluded to the issue of mentoring young kids and helping families and so on. And I said, no, we got to rewrite that where we're talking about law enforcement and judges. And so recently I've sat at this table and heard folks talk about that sometimes you have to work with who's brought to your door. And I think collectively you all have to do that. But I also know the story from Judge Johnson. I'm sure he told the story elsewhere, but he said something like when he was a youth, someone showed him grace, a police officer. And he said the fact that he didn't enter that system, it made a great deal of difference to him. So one of the things that I think, and I say this not to be flippish or so on, but I was in Omaha when Vivian Strong was killed. And I remember the trauma of the young girl being shot in the back of the head. Even as an adult, I tell people I'm still afraid of police officers. And I had a police officer in my neighbor. But since I started attending 360, I've seen some of the nicest officers, and I even made a comment, people probably thought it was an insult. I said, I didn't know they could be that intelligent, because I'm so used to seeing some of the negativity through other people and things that have happened historically in this city. And then when I meet Vivian, different officers who are very much professional doing it, I'm like, wow, check it out. And one of the things, if you guys have heard me in 360, I've been arguing for at least a year. How come we don't have more table talks or conversations with law enforcement in the community? Not a meeting that happens at 2 in the afternoon, and I think that's part of the agenda. Because as we start to realize those kids are our kids, then I think that could address some of that. The other issue, I think, is sometimes when I look at the literature, sometimes we don't do a good job, as Malcolm X like to say, make it plain. So sometimes we talk up here at 60,000 feet level, and we need to make it down to 30,000 feet level. And you'd be surprised how many people have the cognitive process to understand issues just by their own lived experience. So I think what we have to do sometime as bureaucrats, administrators, is get out of people's way and allow them to develop those organic social capital amongst themselves to deal with this. I don't think anyone wants folks to do certain things, but at the same time, I also believe in tough love. And I always like to tell the story that my mother used to whoop me so every now and then before I did something. How does that work? I mean, seriously. And when I pointed out to her years later, she denied it. She said, no, I know what you're talking about. But when she made me stick my hand out and get hit a couple of times on the hand before I did something, I mean, it does something to you. Now, as we get older, you've heard many of us say that, we brag about our whippings and beatings and stuff. But back then, we wasn't doing that, y'all. And I dislike my friend's mother, Mrs. Charlotte, because she uses switches. Or at least, you know, we got belts. I like that in the hand versus a switch anywhere. Go and cut down a tree limb or whatever and get beat with a branch. How does that work? At least my mother had a little bit of more where she didn't do that. It had to be a leather belt in the hand. But even then, today, folks, if some of that happens, some people may lose their family, their children. And we got to begin to be using some common sense and snatching these kids away. And I say that very seriously. Because before I started working for Promise Ship, I used to call it the baby snatching machine. Because I've heard some stories that I know the things that happen that way. I sat in on our first meetings. So again, going back to the issue of what your question is, we got to recalibrate what we do, and we got to also bring the people to the table who we're serving to engage us. That African proverb goes, the eye cannot see itself. And so again, when those folks throw those proverbs on you, either you figure it out or you don't. But I think too often, it's not about me, folks. It's about our community and a sense of ownership collectively by all of us. So I really think we have to also deal with tough love. And by the way, I don't really want to say this, but I'm going to say it. I interviewed a job years ago at Agoka, but now NCAP, and they asked me a question. I know it was a deal breaker. They said, if a person is convicted of a crime, how many chances will you give them? And I just came out and said, maybe 2. 3 if I'm happy. But I guess some people don't like that. I ain't got time to baby some people. I just think how I roll. So again, I think there's a balance between that. But also I think we got to look at the context of when things happen. And also we have to be more educated about what law is and what are the ramifications, because sometimes those of us who are novice outside of it may see it completely from a naive point of view, particularly in talking about public safety. So that's why I think the relationship and social capital between law enforcement and judges and so on, because none of us live in a vacuum. And sometimes we act like that. But I think that may be an enemy to deal with DMC. And I know we can change it if we sometimes go upstream and deal with the issues that cause some of the reasons that some of these young people are misguided. But great question, appreciate it.
Well, you know, there's something else I think I'd be remiss if we didn't bring this up, because it's not necessarily drug or DMC related, but it is related to the larger issue of our kids, and that is this morning I read about the arrest of the 14-year-old for first-degree murder and the 15-year-old because they shot and killed somebody. I mean, what are we talking about?
Right.
Why do these kids have guns?
Right.
And how do they get the guns?
Right.
And what are we doing? I mean, we talk about the school shootings, and we talk about the mental health and how can we address the mental health, and it's a big issue, rightfully so. But then we have other issues where these kids are just, you know, going out in the community, and then it's in the paper, one day, and then it just passes, and then what?
Right.
So, you know, I would be interested to see, and I know there's confidentiality issues, but with these 2 kids, a 14 and 15-year-old, what happened that led up to this in their lives and in their family situation and their school situation? Were there opportunities to get to these kids before it got to that point? I don't know if it was gang related or what it was, but I mean, I have a 10-year-old son. I mean, come on, what are we talking about? You know, we got to get to the point where that stuff does not happen in our community, because there's no reason for it.
And to take it from a wise man sitting over there in the blue shirt and the jacket, when you look at that, like Rodney's philosophy is with Mays, when you are able to peel back that layer, there are layers and layers and layers upon layers that got somebody to that point. So there's never going to be a one size fits all. As far as getting guns, unfortunately, it's easy to get guns. I did a community presentation, talk about straw purchasing, which is when people purchase guns for someone who can't pass a background check. So if you take that, and these 2 kids, you know, were able to get guns in their hands, it's unfortunately right now it's easier than you think.
And there's got to be a way to fix that.
And it's a community
there's
fault,
gotta
because
be.
all the adults who are calling in now saying the gun came from the father, who was a big time drug dealer. But all these community people who are now calling and saying that information, why didn't somebody call in before that to report this guy taking her around to drug deals and drug buys And the fact that she wasn't going to school, why didn't somebody alert that? But you have all these people who are now saying they're neighbors, or they was with him when he brought her, or he was abusive. Why did they not call Child Protection Services? And that's what I was saying, and flippantly, but I meant it. Maybe we need to have a Crime Stoppers fund for Child Protection Services. If that's going to be the only way people are gonna call in and report situations, because they surely called in to get that Crime Stoppers money to report this little 14-year-old had been crawling in and out of the house and had killed her father. He had been there for 3 days. But nobody bothered to call ahead of time that could have prevented that by talking about all this abuse. And now everybody's talking on social media about all they knew about that. Well, why didn't somebody step ahead? So now you got these 2 African-American kids who are gonna contribute to our DMC population, but there's more to that story than the over-criminalization of our black youth.
And it's not, you know, this kid's gonna be turned into, oh, he's a first-degree murderer, he's a killer, he's one of those kids that, the reason why we have to have detention. But it's just so much more than that.
It was.
People don't wanna peel back
Those layers.
the layers.
And I think our community gets desensitized with those types of things that happen in the community. So I do think overall it's a community issue, but people just, it's the norm. So nobody's gonna call and report it because this happens all the time.
And our juvenile justice system cannot solve those pre-system involvement issues. It would require the juvenile justice system to be able to read minds and be clairvoyant. So some of this is going to have to be put back on the backs of community people, which I'm happy we now have a full-time coordinator that can start having those community conversations as well as these system conversations, because we can't just keep thinking that it's always the system that have to respond to these problems. The community owns a great amount of responsibility for this. And we're gonna have that conversation. Yes, Shelley?
And I just want to say, because as the JDI coordinator, I think this gets confused a lot. We understand that there are children who need to be detained in our county, and we know that. And I think you're right, that if there's an opportunity to look at these cases, it's important, because my fear is how we react to other children because of these 2 stories. These 2 stories do not make the majority of the kids who show up at our detention center be there for murder. It's not why they're there. We have a large group of kids that we can do something about. So I think you're right, and I hope there is some way that maybe the stories could be told to show the differences between the bulk of the kids that we know we can do something
Well,
for.
and even the kids that committed the crime, I mean, they have a face and they have a name and they have a history. So I don't want to just you're 14,
Right.
and when you commit that crime, do you really understand what you're doing and the consequences of it?
Right. And
You
we
know,
live in a
it's
state,
not-
one of few states that still allow kids to be sentenced to life in prison. It's an issue.
But DMC factors in how we even respond to it. Did you have a comment? Somebody else have a comment? DMC factors into how we respond to stuff, because if you look at that 17-year-old guy in Florida who killed of all the people, the outpouring was, oh, that poor child, why didn't somebody help him? It was completely different than if a black kid would have, there would have been a little thug and lock him up, and just the way we even respond to it, because even when that little 12-year-old was charged with being involved in a homicide a couple of years ago, the way the community responded to that kid and that family, the same people who I'm hearing now talking about this kid in Florida being this little victim and why didn't we, help him and intervene, that just shows our biases. And I think that that's a conversation we must have as well. Sometimes we can put certain races and groups into categories where we apply that blanket approach to how we react to them.
Because we're ignorant of our own. When you say bias, I mean there's explicit bias where you really come on, you know what you're doing, and then there's people that just don't. They're ignorant. They were raised a certain way, and they need to be educated, and they need to be open to that. So the first thing is, how do you get them to open up to the fact that maybe I am saying things through a filter that I didn't even realize I was saying it? Because I think once people can get to admit to that, then they can open up to the possibilities. But that's the hardest part, I think.
And I want to tag on that. One of the things that I constantly get questioned about for people who don't live Northeast is, oh, we hear all this information. Do you have to wear a bulletproof vest to get you in and out the parking lot just for you to go to work? And unfortunately, these conversations have came up on different advisory committees that I'm on. That bias is extremely hard to get over. And sometimes, yes, I may be flippant, but I always tell them, okay, you think you're safer west of 72nd Street? I said, at least the majority of the shootings that happen in Northeast are targeted, and it's not little Billy making a bomb. You're ready to blow up the high school and the cafeteria lady. So crime exists all over this city. And then people have a false sense of security living in West Omaha too, because I always say, you guys are the ones that leave your laptops, your iPads, and everything, leave your doors unlocked, and everything else, even to your house, thinking that you have that false sense of security that no, this crime is not going to happen here.
And then you think people from North Omaha are coming way out to where you live.
Way out to
still,
where you
know,
live.
And it's your neighbor. It's your neighbor's kids.
So-
It happens everywhere.
Okay, so I'm just saying, there is crime all over, and I agree that yes, since they are African-American kids, they're not automatically deemed mental health. And you see this too much, too much.
I do think that
Greg had a comment.
So it's a question along those lines for Ashmal. Part of what we're talking about is a byproduct of the package that's presented to us via media. So do you have any vision of how you're going to address media?
Oh man, I'm the same complex here. I appreciate that. You know, one of the things you guys may not be aware of, but I've been fighting Nebraska educational television radio for years, the media in general. I got the letters to show it. But part of the issue is that when I'm teaching class elsewhere, I can see people have these images, and that's all they get. If you see in the morning news when a crime has happened, it keeps repeating. And so after a while, sometimes when I'm engaging folks in table talk or in a cultural humility training, they will share things, particularly in the very thing. So I think collectively, we got to push back at the media. And it's not like it used to be in one areas where we had a lot of our own community media. But I think we got to have much more integration in the media so that people are not constantly having those images. And one example I use oftentimes is my experience, again, in Botswana. When I came back from Botswana, even today, I can talk to people about things in Africa. They have no clue. Even if I paint a good picture, they still think that people live in this way. And I'm not saying that some people don't live that way. But you can't even enter a conversation, people can't comprehend it. Or it's almost like when and I tell the story, sometime when you go somewhere and somebody say, is that really you? Or did you do that? Or where you come from? Or when you tell these stories, you don't seem like that kind of person. I do the same thing to people. And so I think the more we push back and make more of those human interest stories, and I want to say Nebraska stories, we can change it. Something else that is probably part of this conversation I was going to throw out is that we really got to keep coming back to what do we all own in this discussion. And years ago, my boss at Catholic Charities, Scott Adams, I call his name out right now because I really appreciate what he did. Sometimes I have a tendency of moving around different places doing that kind of free willy or freestyle talking, and you ought to catch that a little bit here. But what he said to me, what is your 3 most important things that you did for the year? And he told me to distill it down there. I heard a priest, Brian Hare from Boston University, say the same thing. And I throw that same question back out here. What are the 3 things we want to do to deal with it? So you might say the media, to get more parents involved, make institutions much more open. I ask myself that question all the time. And then I also like phrasing it because sometimes I'm a little slow. I'm not the sharpest blade in this room, but I'll ask this from a sense of humility. And I think it's probably what this is all about. If you had that magic wand, what do you want to have happen? And what are you doing to make it happen? So don't necessarily always put it on 1 or 2 of us.
Right.
Collectively,
Right.
I can't do the heavy lifting. And again, when you're in villages and communities and you see people do what we call the folklore, which means like a gathering, you'd be surprised what people can make happen. And when I travel to rural communities, even in Nebraska, and I see some of the things that they do where they don't even have government involved, it can be very powerful. And then the last point is, United Way used to have this mission statement that said, I thought it was probably one of the beautiful mission statements ever. Our role is to help people to care for each other, or to build the capacity to care for each other. So again, if you use those kind of philosophies and things, folks, that's, I think, how we can deal with it. Because I think the media is one of them, but there's countless other things, and I think collectively I'm going to push back at all of us. At the end of the year, what did you do? And if you're, as Ernie likes to say, if you're in motion, Father Time cannot catch you. And if Father Time does catch it, at least you'll be in motion. So I think each and every one, I think that's part of our problem. We're not always in motion. And we shouldn't be about that, and we use this expression in Ebonics, Black English, that do-nothinger. We used to say that a long time, he's a do-nothinger. So again, it sounds like an oxymoron, but at the end of the day, we gotta own it, and then hopefully get other people to join us to push back at the media, because I don't like watching the media when I don't see representation of our families and community. I see more dog stories and animal stories on TV than I do people stories.
And we can't keep telling the same success story, so next year, DMC committee cannot be seeing our success if we got a DMC coordinator. Because that means that we lack ambition and we're not raising the bar. We have to keep pointing to progress.
I like that, I like that.
And not just keep grabbing the low-hanging fruit.
Right.
Judith had a comment, and I think Elijah, was your hand up?
Yeah, but both of y'all just about answered it, but I'll go ahead on and put it out there anyway. The community in general has historically known the situation that we have in this country. This organization here was not aware of it until 1976. Since 1976, the issue of youth, even though adults have been suffering through it generationally, has come up. Why in 2000 and, what is this, 18?
Yeah, I'm gonna time travel to 18. Yeah.
From 76 to 2018 is a body of this particular nature still asking why?
Wow, that's a deep question.
Well, I think a lot of people know what one of the big answers to that is.
I didn't hear, I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I think a lot of the answer is a lack of attention by the people who are in power, who have power and influence, because it's not the right kind of people. You know, I mean, it's, think about it. You know, that's the truth, and that's why, you know, it's like the pressure with the assault weapons ban that the kids are putting on now. That kind of pressure is now national pressure, and it's starting to make a difference. That pressure has not been brought to bear, and it needs to be brought to bear upon and ultimately by the people that are in power. And you know what you have in power is a bunch of people who look like me.
And just to piggyback off what you said, Patrick, why fix something if it's benefiting other people?
Well, and it's North Omaha and South Omaha, you know, and the representation, you know, we have one African American on the county board, and we had Carol Woods Harris before that, but the county board is not representative of the community.
Right, that's true.
And I don't want to just pick on the county board. I mean, the state legislature is not representative of the community. And we need to assist those people who are interested in politics to get into it and to run for office and not be prevented from doing so because they don't look the right way or don't act the right way. You know, I told Jamal yesterday, I said, why aren't you ever in politics? And his feeling's the same as mine is. It's a really dirty business.
It really is.
And to be honest, you know, if I had, I don't think you have skeletons in your closet.
No, I have
a
none.
little
I
bit.
can say that publicly. I have none. I've got some real
But I
ones
have a feeling
in
that
my
my
house.
skeletons would probably be forgiven more easily than your skeletons.
Right.
Because of the way I look and the way you look. So-
And then also too, if I can say something too, another thing where this city makes a mistake is, especially in the African American community, they think one entity,
Right.
2 o'clock meeting, speaks for everybody. And it doesn't. And you're right, because when we got ready to, Mark and I, family, we were interconnected. We got ready to launch an anti-crime response to when Mark's nephew, my cousin, got killed. And this person unilaterally had the ability to almost shut it down. So we have to, even Black voices, I do not speak for Black America, I do not speak for Black Omaha or Black Douglas County, and we have to quit thinking that one person speaks for everyone. That's why parents aren't coming to the table, because they feel that if we have this Black person here, that person represents the voice. And I think that is the biggest thing that the problem that we're getting people involved is their voices aren't being heard. Now, to say something about the representation, I go even further. We have to get the right people in place to push on the diversity of our hiring and promotion. Because when you look at in juvenile justice, if you cut it open, it's white. Ajimal was the first Black person hired in juvenile justice since I've been involved. The last hires have all been white females, and nobody is raising hell about it but me.
And that's what my daughter said.
And here's the problem. You get somebody who has misinterpreted the Supreme Court decision. They did not say you could not use race. They said race cannot be the only factor. But if it's going to solve an issue and have a diverse and inclusive juvenile justice system is addressing a bigger issue, of course race can be factored into that if everything else is qualified and equal. But it is absolutely no accident or no coincidence that the last hires under our initiatives for reforming juvenile justice have all been white females. And I blame the county for that, because they could have pulled the plug and pushed back on that, because they're at a table where we're discussing those hiring.
Well, we have, and again, I work for the county board, so, you know, I say things that can get me in trouble a lot. But
Well, keep talking, keep talking. Just keep talking, keep
I
talking.
got about 2 years, 7 months before I hit Rule 75, so.
That's what we do.
We have 2 commissioners that are at the table. There's 7 commissioners. And they need to get more involved. All 7 of them need to take this seriously and not just at a county board meeting talk about how they feel it's important. But they can come to the meetings and they can put their money where their mouth is. I mean, we rely so much on grant money, but why are we afraid to use general tax?
And that's what we're gonna have to do to give change. We're going to have to make juvenile justice reform independent of private philanthropy and grant money. Because when you have the tail wags the dog, when you start relying too much on grant money or private philanthropy, those are the ones, and the people who control the purse strings make the shots. We need to reform juvenile justice on a real, sustainable method, which is tax dollars. That
You have
way we
skin in the
don't.
game. You feel like you have skin in the game, because if it's just grant, and I love grant money. Don't get me wrong. I don't want grant money to go away, but you can't rely on it too much. Because then you feel like it's the
Or
private
private
money.
philanthropy.
We need to have skin in the game.
Our kids have become lab rats because private philanthropy and grants want to do studies and want to invest, see what happens. No, these are real kids we're talking about. So they do all these evaluative studies, they do all these plans and processes. Right now, we're involved in what's no more than a study. It's in our kids, especially the kids who are impacted by DMC, they're becoming almost lab rats in these studies. Because you cannot tell me in 7 years with JDAI and OIS that we should not be further along with our reform method. And nobody is questioning why we're still at ground zero. These are kids we're talking about. And so I just think that getting back to the purpose here, hopefully by having a full-time person now, that they will start being able to connect the dots and hold our elected officials, hold the community accountable for moving the dial and reducing the number of disproportionality. Because as I say all the time when it got misinterpreted about comments I've made, DMC is not about elevating the role or lives of black kids over white kids. But because of the disproportionality and proportionality of representation, it makes it an issue. But once we address DMC, we're gonna solve juvenile justice. We're gonna be so darn close to doing it because the problems interconnect with each other.
And I just like to add one piece. At the youth center, we see DMC from a very unique perspective, because as youth get deeper into the system, typically that's where they're going to come. And the challenge at the youth center is a lot to do with a couple of things. One, the recidivism. The number of, in particular, African American males that come back to the youth center through the justice system, of course, 5, 10, 15 times. And it's more common than uncommon, and that's the challenge. And the other part is why so many minorities are staying longer for the same charges that's in the youth center. And it's when we have an unlawful absence and we have 2 individuals, it appears in most cases, African American males are staying anywhere from 10 to 2 weeks to 17 days longer for the same charge. So all things being equal, there's 2 opportunities that if we can address and if we can make some meaningful change, it'll have some direct impact on DMC. And this last thing I'll say, Shelley is 100% right. Not everyone that comes to the youth center should be in the juvenile justice system. And unfortunately, some of the things that get individuals in the juvenile justice system are behaviors that are more attributed to mental health conditions than it actually is behavioral conditions. And in the long run, I certainly like to be able to see, as we grow as a county, as we look to address DMC, that those youth that need to be in a mental health environment should be in a mental health environment, not in the judicial system. And those youth that have committed offenses that need to be in the justice system, then they're where they need to be. But the challenge really is mixing up youth that really should be somewhere else, and making sure that once youth are in, they're staying similar amounts of time for the same offenses. It shouldn't be such where longer offenses should be dependent on the color of the skin or the opinion. It really are things that need to be addressed. And from a youth center perspective, those are the challenges that I see.
I have to turn the meeting over to Mark. I have to get back to my office. But the comment I want to
Point of
make,
question,
that I would
please.
be remiss if I did not leave, he's going to turn it on, he's going to handle it, is that I'm very disappointed in the lack of representation at this meeting today by the people who make up the steering committee of OYS and JDAI. It's a support event, and sometimes you show your support behind something if you come in to support it. They could, we have no representation from either one of the decision-making or governance structures of either of these two initiatives. And that speaks volumes about why we can't move the dial. It speaks volumes. There is not one member besides myself and Patrick who is representing, and we should not be, we should not count a part of this committee. But I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the fact that they did not think enough of this event to even show their face to say it, and it really bothers me because everybody got invited to this.
You didn't answer my question.
Oh, what was the question?
After generations, after an outlook from 1976 by the legal system itself across the nation, with a group of individuals that we have in this room right now, why are we asking why at this stage of the game?
Wow, that's a good question. I would say sometimes of us develop amnesia, some of us got lost on our way, and sometimes the very people who help keep you on track is not there to keep you on track. So Buddy Hogan, who used to be head of the NAACP years ago, made a statement. We're having a discussion similar to this with the superintendent of schools, and he says, I would bet 25 years from now you're going to have the same discussion. And sure enough, 25 years later, some of the things that Norbert Sherman was talking about in that room of leaders, we're repeating the same things in our system. So I think sometimes we lost the will, the faith, and so on.
Well, why are we still a de facto segregated city?
Right. You know what? That's a great question, Patrick. One of the things in my mind is I go back to the busing thing, and I raise this, and not to be flippish or crazy, but my mother and those 7 women knew that when you go to another part of town, you got a better education. And somewhere along the line, the system adapted and put in that old system in so many words that we didn't learn from our reasons of just having kids sit next to each other. So that was one thing. The other issue I raised, and it's part of the same question, we have district elections. And I was talking to Chris Rogers one day, and I said, having grown up in this city, I know Chris is really from East St. Louis, where my mother's from, I said to him straight up, are we better off by having district elections? If we look at where we're at collectively today, when we don't come together and we don't have constituents in having these conversations, because I know that people don't know the difference between county government, city government, state legislature, where are we having those conversations at? When you have people elected to the school board by district, and you never sit in their districts talking to constituents, and I know that. Or when you write letters to them and they're not there. So one of the things I'm going to argue emphatically is that we really got to get people into these conversations, and that's where change is going to really come and so on. But I also will go a little bit deeper and say at the end of the day, if we're talking about participatory democracy and engagement with state senators, whoever, we got to make sure that those elected officials are serving our needs. Because at the end of the day, we all have to pay taxes. And I'd like to see those taxes go to help those with the greatest need. And again, part of the conversation is, why are we this way as we were 50 years ago? Because when you ask people in any audience, where do most African Americans live, Hispanic lives, white, people have been asking that question the same way for over at least 60, 80, 100 years. And in this day and age, we all love diversity, so why is it we love that UNICEF postcard, we can't even achieve it? And that's part of this conversation. But I really think at the end of the day, and I will tell you up front, I need somebody to push me from time to time. I've been known to go out and buy a membership at the gym and let it lapse and never go in the door. And I've been known to buy those candy bars when I go to the store and eat them before I get to the car.
You got a trainer right here.
Yeah.
Well, you see what I'm saying? So I know just because I bought a new tracksuit and I got some new tennis shoes, that's not going to force me to work out. So I got to be humble enough to know that there are things I can't do by myself. And so I'm really emphatic about that expression, don't talk about it, be about it. So if we're not doing it, it means we have to push back at each other. And again, I think a lot of us may have clay feet at different times, and we need other people to help push us. And I will throw that out not only for myself, but for those who are engaged in the struggle. And in Southern Africa, when they were fighting for their independence, Mozambique and Angola particularly, they use the term a luta continua, which means the struggle continues. And so if we bear that in mind, these become part of our culture. Change engines.
And in fairness for some of the folks, I know that there's another meeting going on currently with OIS where individuals would have liked to have attended, but there's a conflict. Maybe they'll get the chance to show up before it's over. Any other direct questions? Right.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on Patrick and Elijah there, because I do feel like we do know the solutions. It's just, I think we've been conditioned to, when we come up against a problem, to say, why is this happening? Why do you get minority contact, more than others? And why are maybe gang violence, kind of even glorified even more so than even mass shootings sometimes, and it's just a very complex answer, because I think there's 1,001 solutions. I think there's 1,001 answers, and we kind of get frozen by, well, which idea do we put the energy towards and try to develop. I feel like the lack of black male teachers is a huge issue in this community, which trickle down, to help with the trauma and the layers that we're talking about, because that's what we're talking about. Is if a particular family didn't have the education or the skills equipped to handle the trauma that was generationally set down in front of it, then it has a hard time expressing the true potential of that particular individual. And then, if you have 10 families like that, then that, kind of influences the next families around them in that community and all that, And I know these things because I'm at a basketball game, with my program, and on both sides, you do have one side that was handling a bit of adversity on the court differently, but these are all people that are all in the same community, where one, side was saying, N-word, man, I'll shoot you. What, over a foul? Over a basketball game that nobody's being played around? And then you have other people on the other side who love these other individuals, know some of these individuals' families and cousins, and they're also saying, dang, why are you thinking like that? You tripping right now. Like you are on that, you are lost right now. Because for you see what I'm saying? So there's a bit of psychology and trauma that has all melded together, and in different combinations of your personality, your individual. Is it mental health? Is it behavior? Is it a lack of a male role model? Is your mom not very emotionally equipped to have a relationship and show you what a real relationship is with a man, and blah, 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 So all of those things together create some of the issues, and so I do feel like we do have the solutions, but maybe we start from the solution, and then we kind of work backwards to say, how do we make the solution happen? So the disproportionality with the boards and all of these umbrella organizations, the disproportionality of how the money is divvied out, our issues with grants, our issues with maybe this state and city not, putting skin in the game a little bit more. We have the solutions. It's just maybe we start from those solutions and work backwards. And everybody's been having some great input, because we definitely need. I like to call, white people who seem to have a grasp on the issue, like modern day abolitionists, whatever you want, because I don't feel like we're any far off from where we had been. The numbers haven't changed. Everything's working according to plan that was already set in when it was set, So we know the solutions, we just, you know, maybe change our perspective and our direction and angle from how we're trying to attack the problem.
And it's got to take a will to do it. That pressure put on those that have the power and the influence and the money to do it. I mean, like I said, the assault, the killing of 17 kids in Florida, and now that's a big issue, and things are starting to change. Boycotts are happening, but it was a white kid that went into a school and shot a bunch of kids. The people in power their hands have to be forced, because there's too many times where it's just platitudes that, you know, we care, but are we willing to do those things necessary, put the money into it, put the time, the effort, the resources into it to effectuate the change?
And this is the first time that you've ever seen major corporations pull their funding from the NRA. This is the very first time, and I don't know out of all the different shootings that have happened, at least in my lifetime, this is the first time when you actually have them, you know, putting their money where their mouth is.
And we're to our last 15 minutes or so, and I'd like to give everyone a chance to say something. So we'll start with Dave, and we'll go all the way around, and you can address it certainly to Al-Jamal, but we'll respond to any questions.
Yeah, you still in the hot seat.
I thought this was a reception, y'all. Wait, that's how I was told to come.
Wait till we throw a real party.
Yeah, I'm like, hold it, I'm just figuring to eat.
That's the after party.
Oh.
I'm a,
Okay. Careful.
I'm a recent convert. Okay? Well, I was a long time career military, and there's still problems in the military, but it doesn't, you know, it's not like living in Omaha and stuff like that. I mean, I was at the academy, my first cadet commander, first black cadet commander was in my class. Chappie James was a 4-star general in the area. I mean, I've lived a life of equality. You know, I mean, not perfect equality, and I know that, and I've always been a listener, so I've heard people's stories all along, and I heard stories of a long time, my African American classmates and fellow officers and stuff like that. I kind of think, okay, you're a little oversensitive and stuff, but so I'm a long time convert. I came, and Release Ministry did it to me because it's when I came back, my daughter was the first house parent of Release Ministries, and so they asked us to come back because my daughter's also pregnant with their first grandchild. So we came back from Virginia to live there, and so the first group of kids that were in the house were NBA guys, and so we bought a big screen, and when basketball was on, and then I found out they were NFL guys too, and so they were at our house all the time, and I understood. And so all these people, all these stories of the guys I really respected were telling me, I thought oversensitive, they were being kind. They were being kind when they told me these things. So that's where I am right now. And so I have a lot more questions than I do answers, and that's one of the reasons I'm here. But I have a predominantly white board with predominantly white staff, although we have over half our hires in the last year have been African American, and we're moving to that. We're moving that in leadership. We're moving in that. So I'm from a faith-based area. It's I guess I come here and I don't say a lot because I still am really in the learning process. But we're changing our organization. We're changing the way, and I'm going to start. I want to bring. We have an African American chaplain at the DCYC. I want him to start coming for him to understand this more. I talk to him about it all the time, and we got a grant with the county to do some things in the mentoring area because of our mental health stuff and because of our in-home services. We have an African American who's running that part, and I want him to be here. So I really don't have a lot of answers. I do know about everything that's been said today. I've learned that, and I believe it, and I'm here to be part of that. And so I'm just here to help figure out where I go, where I take the people, where our organization goes with that, because we're committed to that.
And so, thanks, Dave.
Okay.
Great.
Well, first of all, I'm glad this chair didn't give out on me.
You flirted with it.
Yes, flirted hard. But I kind of echo the initial part of Dave's comments because I grew up in a military home, and I've got friends. It's funny, once Facebook came around, you know, and started connecting with friends, I started finding out, well, this person's Hispanic, and this person, you know, is Vietnamese, or this person is whatever, because it just didn't matter, you know, and that's the background from military. So that's kind of my upbringing. But I also, you know, have family. I'm from Tampa, Florida, and then from Bronx, New York. So, you know, I understand the realities, you know, of the world as well, too. So I got to see, you know, kind of both sides of it. And I understand that when, you know, we have young Hispanic or young black men and or young black men and women who are coming in, their first offense is murder. There's a huge problem that's in the community, and I say it all the time to Mark and to other people as well, that, you know, recidivism doesn't happen at DCYC. You know, we are just a reflection of the community, and there needs to be, you know, more that is put on the community, you know, grassroots, providers, juvenile justice system, and all other aspects as well too, if we're truly going to get rid of the problem that these kids face. Because we talk about the fact that there's a certain type of kid that belongs in DCYC, and there's a certain type of kid who does not. Well, when the reality of the situation is that there's not much of a chasm between both, and we miss out on that because these kids, due to social media, you know, due to things that they're exposed to, are highly connected with one another. So where they may present on the RAI or something other as being different or lower risk, they are still in that same environment, and there's not much of a difference between them. And I know this because I sit down and talk to them on a daily basis. So we have to understand what these kids are exposed to, and not only what they're exposed to, but why they're exposed to it. And I'll kind of end with this. You know, one of my favorite, I still listen to hip hop, you know, but I listen to stuff that's meaningful. And one of my favorite verses comes from Jay-Z, and he says, you know why they call a project? Because it's a project. An experiment, and we're in it only as objects. The objects for us to explore our prospects. So,
Thank you. Excellent. Shelley.
So I have two things to offer, and you guys know me, I'm not a Pollyanna, but I will tell you this. The political will in Douglas County, at least our officials are telling us that it's here and it's now for DMC. So I do think we have room to make change. The political will is here. The county board has asked us to bring this in front of their faces more often because maybe, you know, we all know what the system looks like. There's a lot of moving parts. It's hard to understand the whole thing, and it's hard for people who are politicians who have 50 other issues going on. So they've asked us, come back, put it in our face. We want to help you. We don't get it. So I think the political will for this is now. And the other thing, this is Mr. Elijah Ali. You know, when Elijah says we had these conversations in 1965, that's hard for some of us to hear. And another thing that I will offer you is what we know. Our children do not want the world the way it is now. They don't see other cultures the way our grandparents did. They don't want to assimilate and be like us. They want to know about different cultures, and they want to learn. We owe this to our kids. And the last thing is, can we approve minutes? Just real quick when everyone's done.
Yes,
Thank you.
we can.
That's all I got. The political will is here. The time is now. Our kids want it, and it's our role. We're the grown-ups. Let's do our part.
Excellent.
Yeah, so being born and raised here in Omaha, seen and observed differences, you know, with my classmates and friends growing up, you know, who were black or minorities. And I'm excited to have you in this position, and I think the political will is here. And I resonate with what Levon said. And let's not make next year our, you know, we got a DMC coordinator. Let's make next year something that's even bigger, and I think the political will is here to do that now.
Yeah, I guess congratulations. like everyone else, I'm really glad that this position exists. It's, I'm new to this whole world, so, but it sounds like, you guys have been working for a long time and things like this, which is great. Being new, I hope that from a data perspective, my goals are to make things really, you just kind of started off by saying like, why isn't this stuff like, why aren't we talking about it all? And that's the stuff that I hope that I can start to help with, so, yeah.
So I'm not from here originally. I think most of you know me, have known that by now. I didn't know a lot about Omaha coming in. I did my research. I didn't really understand what I was seeing. I didn't think the problem here, and the problem is talked about. I just didn't realize, to that extent till I got here. Not many people know this about me. My wife's grew up in North Omaha. Her family has deep roots in that community. Her aunt comes back from Atlanta every year for Native Omaha days. That's when we get to see her. I think the political we're in Douglas County is here. I think we're starting to see some troubling things at the state level, that there's been some pushback. So I'm glad to see that we have, a dedicated data person beside myself here. I'm glad to see that we have, a really talented person in this critical position for DMC coordinator at the local level, but I think we're gonna need to push back through some harsh realities at the state level, and certainly we all know at the federal level to get anything done these days. I think, like Milan said, we can't just rest on our laurels. We have to take this momentum and really use it while we've got it.
All right. Well, I've been here almost 3 years now, 2.5, 2 3/4. And I was very happy that Ajmal was selected for this position. I know that he has a passion for the work, and I know that he will be able to stand his ground with the best of them, right? He'll be able to ask those hard questions, but he also always brings it in a way that's palatable, and he doesn't burn bridges, which is really important in this work, because I think that we have to be able to communicate with one another to get anything accomplished. And I challenge us all as a committee to continue to be solution focused, to come to these meetings and not only have these great dialogues, but actually at the end of the day say, okay, what's going to happen between this meeting and next meeting to make something happen, which is the most important and effective thing that we can do, is to make something happen between the meetings. So I'm really happy for the partnership. I think that, OIS obviously embraces you with open arms. We're a big fan of Ajmal. So I want to say, I think it's really important to build on what's working. We do have things that are working in this community. It is very difficult to shape a mountain, right? Coming from New Mexico, I can say, with those big, beautiful mountains, the air that runs around them day in and day out only moves little grains of sand, and this is like shaping a mountain. This is the landscape of our community, and it's very challenging. And so it will take a long time, but we will persevere through that, and we'll take the frustrating things and we'll try to figure them out, and we'll try to move forward together. I think we have to remember, that collaboration over competition is where this committee is going to do work, is to quit saying, grabbing at straws, but really collaborating and saying, what resources do I bring to the table that can help us move forward? I am absolutely just so proud of the work that's already been done with our partners at Omaha Police Department. And I want to continue that. And I think that there's a huge piece of that work for this committee as well. So I hope that, this committee will bring some things forward. Lastly, I think it's, are we who we say we are? We have all of these great mission and vision statements and the reform efforts, and I question daily, are we who we say we are? Are we really trying to live out that vision and live on that mission? And if we are, then we should be working in a way that benefits our kids and families. We are an example to them, and if we can't play nice in the sandbox, how do we expect to resolve anybody else's problems? Right? So coming together for the greater good, taking our agendas, setting them aside, and saying, what can we do together to make it work? That's what I think. Thank you. Thank you for applying. Thank you for hiring him.
We'll bounce both of them and then come back.
Well, as far as the committee, I just want everybody to really just soul search their own self to see if they're truly passionate about what they're doing and if they're doing it for the right reasons. Because like Alderman said, I've never gotten any award, but when I'm not, the award is when I see young girls saying, hey, I didn't think I could be a police officer, now I can be. And the award is achieving and just keep searching and keep reaching for goals, in even my individual goal. How many kids am I helping that I know that need the help? How many adults that is connected with that kid that I know need the help? And not just in the committee, but when you're looking outside saying, okay, I'm working with Viola because I'm passionate about what she's doing. It ain't my vision, but it's hers, so I want to help her see her vision through. Okay, I'm working with Mark, I'm working with this person, but am I doing it for the right reasons? Am I doing it because I'm truly trying to help somebody, or am I doing it because I'm thinking, hey, well, this could help me get to somewhere else? So really search why we're doing this, and if we can help somebody besides ourselves, do it for the right reasons. That's all.
It's interesting because I have been part of this committee like years prior, and then just kind of recently come back in the last few months, and so excited to be part of that again. And I think two things for me come to mind, and congratulations. And what I appreciate about you, Jamal, is your ability to, like everybody has said, to ask those tough questions, but to also get people to reflect on their own personal desire, passion, will of what they do. And I think that that's hugely important, because then once we look at ourselves and what we can do, what we can bring forth, and what we're accountable for, I think that that's when you start to see change, and what you open yourself up to allow. And the other thing, I share your passion and belief in bringing people to the table and allowing their stories to be heard. And it's their story, and that we don't change how they present that story, right? Because it's their story, and that's what they lived through, and to allow that and have that open, honest discussion. So I look forward to working together to make that happen.
Well, second meeting, again, thanks for being part of your after I give my statements, I'm gonna have to go, because we're gonna try to get one of those guys you talked about providing guns to young people. So, a lot of common themes that are resonating with me, and one big one is traumatic injuries. I know we talked last month about our mother's peer support group, and actually this month, that is going to be our key speaker, is a mental health care professional with expertise in post-traumatic stress injuries, how to identify the warning signs, how to deal with it. Because I can tell you this, as a first responder that is a peer support specialist myself, that stands in the way of success for a lot of people from a lot of backgrounds, whether you're not very wealthy or you're wealthy, and it all affects us the same. And if they're not dealing with it the right way, it's hard to move forward. So, thanks. Thanks, Ray.
Well, Jamal and I go way back, but the thing is that's kind of ironic that when I met him, I was actually running a women's program for cafeteria, Position of Hope, and this has come back as far as a passion of mine. And when I say that, before I left, and I was only gone for a year in Arizona, I was already looking at straw purchasing. So straw, like I identified what straw purchasing was. And the reason why I said I was looking at it before I left, before it became on anybody's agenda, because I was noticing most of the young ladies who were in trouble were African American young ladies, who were actually purchasing the weapons for their boyfriends, who were felons, who couldn't get them on their own. So when I came back to Omaha, in the first case, one of the first things that I saw come across, well, it's not on our desk, it's all on the computer, was how this young lady had purchased a weapon. Her boyfriend shoots the weapon, and I don't know where he's been to forget that Omaha Police Department has ShotSpotter. So ShotSpotter picks up the exact location of where the weapon was shot. He didn't have an opportunity to use it in a crime. But when they got to her house, there were shell casings around the house. Okay, and they did ask to go in, found 2 more weapons. Now, the consequences of all of that is she was a straw purchaser.
her house was Omaha Housing Authority. OHA has a one-strike rule. So if you're on Section 8, you have a one-strike rule. Now you're homeless because chances are, if you are on Section 8 in the first place, you can't afford market value rent. So these consequences will lead you to being at the mercy of, of a slumlord, because you can't afford market rent. So instead of saying, everybody will always say about certain portions of the population, they should know better. My reality is they don't know better. So instead of just saying they should know better, it was just, like I said, it's a passion of mine, and I don't want anybody to take it away and water it down, because our young ladies need to know what it is, and not just from a law enforcement perspective, just even generally being a young lady, because we don't have those systems in place. Like, Ajmal's family, you have Big Lurleen and Little Lurleen. Big Lurleen is Mrs. Johnson. Little Lurleen is the sister. So that's what I'm saying. When you have those structures in place, and people don't understand, the past 20 years, our girls are off the chain just like our young men. So that's why when Vivian says she's helping me, she is. I mean, it's like for no fame, no nothing like that. It's just the need. And if somebody doesn't step up to at least do a small chunk, I can't sit back in good conscience. My mother wouldn't let me. She's deceased, and she was always involved in the community. To say, oh, they should know better. Okay, let's check her off, and let's get in to see how we can help. And then also expose young ladies too, like Lieutenant Buckley said, but I can call her Vivian sometime. Show that there are other women and women of color who are involved in law enforcement. So even like from my perspective, you don't have to be an academy person. You can be a civilian person and apply for a position as well. So welcome. Yeah, we got history. What is about 20, 30 years now?
Right. We were little kids when we started working.
And yes, our precinct advisory council meeting, we do serve lunch. March 27th at 11:30 at Northeast. So.
I'm LaDonna Jones, for those who don't know me. Oh, there's been so many good things said. Welcome, Ajmal, glad you are here. And I just want to say DMC is and I've worked in juvenile justice for about 18 years now. DMC is such a huge, complex issue, and we definitely have to approach it delicately, and there has to be a balance. I do agree with that. This is a community issue. I do agree with what Amber said. This committee has to come up with next steps, because we have great conversations, but we need next steps, and we need to address those things outside of the confinements of this room. And I've said that before. We need to be active. We need to put away our own personal agendas and really take a look at ourselves to see if this is a passion that we have or if it's just an interest. Because a passion is unwavering. Interest is sometimes I'm interested, sometimes I'm not. So we can sit here and have these great conversations, but what I'm saying is when people leave the room, they get back into their silos, into their comfort zones, and the things still remain the same without changing. And then we all come back and we have these great conversations again, and then we leave and things, everybody gets kind of calm, well, yeah, So we have to break out of that and really start feeding this information to the community, because the community is just unaware of so many things. They don't know, they don't understand. And I challenge this committee and Jamal to bring us to a point to where we can get out in the community and have these sit-down conversations with small groups of people and explain it to them on a level to where they would hopefully understand how the system works.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Ajmal, I'm just happy to have you on board. From what I know of you, like Rodney was saying, you'll ask the questions that need to be asked, and you'll challenge the room to be uncomfortable. And I think that's the only way that any of us are going to be able to grow, is to have the uncomfortable conversations. And then I also feel like you also, as LaDonna and Amber were saying, figure out a way the next steps to move forward. So. And I do appreciate the fact that, you mentioned that you do like to be pushed, because I always say, if you're the smartest, man in the room, then you're in the wrong room. And, and I feel like you have some great minds in here that will feel comfortable pushing you and challenging you as well in a positive manner. You know, so I'm looking forward to you know, the direction that we're going. So welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, congratulations, Ajmal. I really hated the fact that you were leaving, but I knew when this position came up that you'd be the perfect person for it. And I really appreciate that you applied. And I guess for me, you know, the thing that I see here mostly is, you know, I'm the only Latina, for one thing, which always is something that I notice. And I don't feel like I'm a token because they don't have tokens that speak their minds, for one thing. You know, that's a for sure. You know, so you're not invited to those places that they don't want someone to tell the truth. And so I think that, you know, there's a lot of opportunities to engage other people. DMC, since I've been involved, it's a year or two now, 2 years now, I guess, is that I feel like, you know, we've done a lot of work. We've identified a lot of system points that need to have some you know, challenges, you know, faced. And I think that education is one of them. You know, what happened to this 14 and 15-year-old children? You know, why didn't anybody notice that they weren't in school? You know, I mean, what is that about? How can somebody be that uncared for, you know, or unnoticed, you know, that they aren't even being tracked at school, you know, by somebody that cares, and, you know, and that kind of leads to why they, you know, do the things that they do generationally. And so I think, you know, that we're on the right track. You know, we need to, you know, cross some of those barriers. We need to, you know, try to get our city, you know, as one. I don't know how long that will take or if it will ever happen, but I do think that, you know, it's something that we need to keep working towards. So good luck, Ajmal.
Thank you. Good luck. Good luck.
I'd say working in youth services, I totally agree. Education is going to be the key, not education in the math and science aspect, but even from a home base, you know, every kid that comes to our door, they'll all say that they're not conditioned. They'll all say that they're not, they don't have biases. And when you point out, even like for myself, I was told, like Ajmal here, you know, from my mom, you know, you got to go to the best schools. The best schools are out west. You know, you have to live out west because that's where the best homes are. And you know, and you send your kid, my kid, I send out to a school out west, and he's one of 5 black kids in the school. What does that do to that kid? Mm-hmm. We reinforce that white is better. We reinforce that, you know, being out west is better. And so when they interact with their African American counterparts, they are standoffish. They think, you know, we've all seen the old video of the little white kid and the little black kid and the little white down and the little black down, and which one is dirty and which one is mean. And you know, these are so reinforced in our conditioning right now. And once we all can admit that we have our biases and that we are conditioned, and we can address those in an educational point of view, I think those would really start making a difference. So from a youth point of view, that's what we do every single day. We want to make sure that DMC is a part of our orientation. When we have a kid sitting in our room, when they first come to Mays, they get a DMC speech about disproportionality, and you can see the wheels spinning in their heads when we're talking about it. So that's how we do every single day, wherever your job is, whatever you do, make sure that in your job you address it every single day. If you don't, before you go to bed at night, you pick up a book and read about it, do something about DMC, and I think that's where the passion will come for all of us. So.
Real quick, Rodney, would you tell everyone how you ask all the kids, because it fascinates me every time, what percentage of Douglas County they believe to be African American when they're coming to Mays?
We always use a table as an example. We say, hey, if this was Nebraska, what representation by percentage would be African American? And they'd be like, oh, shoot, 70, 80%, you know, because that's where they live, that's their block, that's what they know, that's what they see.
72nd and 13th.
Right. You know, and then we say, well, the reality is, and that's good that that's your perception, but the reality is, you know, this small corner here would represent African Americans in the whole state of Nebraska. And if you factor in Latinos and, you know, Asian folks, you can, you know, maybe go out there, but outside of that, everybody else is Caucasian, and they're like, wow. And then you flip it and say, okay, if this was DC Weiss or the county jail or prison down by the airport, what percentage would represent African Americans? And they'd be like, oh shoot, the whole table, you know. And the reality is, it's pretty close, you know. And
I'm gonna ask them, why is that?
right, and they have no clue. Like black people steal more? Or, no, it's impossible. By sheer numbers, it's impossible, you know. And you start talking about that conversation about, you know, being
Disproportionate.
disproportionate and whatnot. But so,
Hey, can I say one last thing? First of all, I didn't say, look, our guys, they've done it. But the thing you just mentioned there, one of the things is the conditioning. One thing that I know it's so conditioned. One of the things I do this is for my grandkids, because when my daughter was pregnant with her third child, all right, and they said, okay, she's still in the home, and there's discussion of the child, is it going to be boy or be girl? And my 4-year-old grandson says, well, I hope he's brown. And he goes, why? He goes, because we don't have any brown members of our family. We have all these people living around us that brown. I have all these brown friends I want in my family. And my daughter goes, well, I don't think that's going to happen. He got really mad. Well, it could. God can answer questions. He can give us a brown person.
Stranger things have happened.
Stranger things have happened. But the point is,
Right?
the point is, it's possible. You know,
It will happen.
It's possible. This can happen, and it has to happen. I just have to tell you.
Thank you.
I'm Elizabeth with the Refugee Advocate Program, Online Family Service. The first time I met with Ajmal was in 2013. He provided a class of poverty at UNO, and I was taking social work classes. And at the time I was going to China for my classes, social work classes. And I talked to him. I was worried like how I'm gonna go to China while I was taking the class with him. And he like, okay, you can go, take your book with you and all of that. And it was a great opportunity to meet with him and listen to his examples and readings and all of that. He would start the class with like reading a book, different books. So when I went to China, I came here as a refugee for some people who don't know. The race, I know we have issues with race and all of that. But when I went to China, I got a doll, a white, like doll, like white, you know. And my white co-workers were like amazed, you know, because, yeah, to me it's like nothing. I want to buy a doll for my daughter from China to be here. But from there it clicks to my mind like, what we've been talking about in the class is like, it's there. You know, because they were so amazed that I was going to buy a doll that white.
Yeah, that was white.
Yes. Anyways, it was a good class, and I learned from it, and I learned from my coworkers too. And the race is there, and we need to talk about it, as you said. I attended some table talk, and then I, you know, met with him in other meetings in the community. So my message to you, or what I need to say, congratulations, anyways. The data person and you, could you please work together, because we say that sometimes I feel like data is not good because we are working with real people, as you know, the one said, but we need it anyways for funding for things like that, and to know where are we at with people we have. So I work with refugees, and there is a problem that African refugees are being identified as African Americans, and then we have Asian refugees, and they're adding more numbers to DMC. They are coming to the system, and we don't know, you know. So it's just to work together and just.
Which goes to a point, we've had conversations about doing national statistics versus by race, and that's, maybe we could, maybe that could be one of the things we check off our list at the end of the year.
It's going to be a lot of work. Like recently, I just noticed with the Crime Commission side, we put Burmese for Asian races. Let me talk about racial. They put Burmese. Burmese is not everybody. Right. The Asian refugee communities. Yeah. So we need to classify them.
Then if I can dovetail on that, because we did receive education in regards to the population, and we always have to tell our officers, just because they're from Burma, they don't call themselves Burmese. It's Karenni because the Burmese were the people in uniform who were abusing them. So the more we get people to understand that and not to group them like that. And that was another community relations building piece, because when they first get here, they're just like, you got on that uniform. We don't trust people in uniform. So how do we know what to talk about if things are going on, against us? Who do we go to? So it's just things like that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Patrick?
So, I've already said a lot today, so I'll try to keep it brief. I just think that Michelle's right that is it Shelley or Michelle?
Either way.
Okay. Is that there is a lot of buy-in now from the county board, and probably more than in the 25 years I've been with the county. So now is the time to strike when the iron's hot, but to keep the pressure on, because there's a lot of other pressures for money and support and resources. We had 75 correctional officers come down to the county board yesterday to talk about their overtime and about the staffing there, which begs the question, why are there 1,350 people in the adult facility? And a lot of those people graduated from being in the juvenile justice system. But there's pressures in that, the adult mental health system, there's pressures with that. There's all kinds of pressures for money and attention, so we've got to keep the pressure on. And we've got to have as much participation from as many sectors of the community as possible. Even I think about this a lot, is that we have several commissioners who are in their 70s who are probably not going to be, in the county board for a lot longer. So we need to get people who want to run for office. And we've never had, to my recollection, a Latino on the county board. So when Commissioner Boyle decides it's finally time to hang it up, and he's done a great job, and he has been invested. But, and I would never say to tell anybody run against my pool, but he's not going to be there forever. So let's get a Latino or a Latina in there to represent South Omaha, because we need more. It's not just North Omaha where African Americans are too. So it would be great if we could get another African American on the county board from another district.
We're west of 72nd Street now too, so.
So, Commissioner Kraft may not, I don't know if he's going to run again, so that's another opportunity to get more. Not only, I'm not an ageist, but it would be nice to have some younger people on there with more that are more connected to the younger generation. But the younger generation does things differently.
It's a must. That's another layer.
So,
it's a must.
Yeah.
That's a must.
Okay, Jamal? No, before I go, Jamal, Elijah.
He was looking at
They do that lately. I've noticed that more so, but
Let's roll.
All right. Good. Jamal, close
You
us
know what?
out.
One of the things I would say, and it goes back to this, and I learned this a long time when I first started teaching, is that there are a lot of people, it takes time for them to process. And I had a student tell me one time that she suffered from attention deficit disorder, and I says, "Oh, is that so? When did you get diagnosed?" She said, "Diagnosed myself." And she basically said to me, in other words, "Don't bore me, all Jamal." One of the things that I think is so important, folks, we have to cut to the chase. And most of you don't know this, but I'm a very strong introvert. And people find that weird, but sometimes I have to write down what I'm saying. I'm always writing. And part is I have to write to think sometimes and see things differently when I write versus if you come from an African tradition or own tradition, you see it differently. So what I really want to argue, folks, is I had a hard time for many years in school because I process differently and I think differently. And I say that not to say it's negative, it's just that's how it is. And I think the reason why a lot of our kids have a hard time in school because they don't process. But at the end of the day, folks, come back to this conversation. We walk away from this conversation enriched by each other's story. Now the issue becomes is how do we translate that story? And again, going back to this concept I just raised, attention deficit disorder. If we're very serious and we only have so much time as we travel through that wormhole, we got to make sure that it's better for those, as I said earlier, those not yet born. But it means that literally we have no choice but to work together. And as you know, we've heard the word frenemies and things like that. What I've learned so much from different people who I disagree with is that at the end of the day, you're going to have to sit down with people you sometimes disagree to work out that common agenda. And so we got to do a little bit better job there. But I really appreciate the warm welcome today. There's also a lot of pressure. And again, I'm not going to be that panacea for our community. Hopefully I won't be the scapegoat. But at the end of the day, I think if we all come together, it'd be like many of those people I've seen elsewhere in villages in Africa as well as rural communities in Nebraska, where we come together and solve a collective issue. Because you hear people use that cliche, it takes a village. But at the end of the day, you can only be a part of that village if you contribute to it. And I think that's what we're talking about here today. So I appreciate the hospitality, the warmth, and of course the refreshments. I'm always talking about food, everybody knows that. That's my favorite thing. But I think from here, folks, I will push back at us collectively to say, I would hope this conversation next year we're going to show some more results. It's going to show that we've moved the needle forward. But thank you very much, and it's been such a pleasure. Now, Elijah, I'm glad you were able to catch this on video, because again, sometimes when you tell these stories to other people, they don't believe it happened, that people came together and did these kind of conversations. And if you've ever participated in a number of table talks in people's homes, one of the things I've learned from most folks, majority, when they invite you to their home, they show you love. And if we did more of that in this community, you see some of the silliness go away. And I got to push back on the last thing about this NRA thing. I'm offended by our governor talking about inviting them to for a convention. I'm going to call it out on record. And again, one of the things I want to say is you got to be very astute politically when you say that during working hours. But at the end of the day, when it's such a powerful opportunity for all of us to stand tall, government and folks represent the people. And so at the end of the day, if we want to be about the people, that means we got to push back when someone says or does something on our behalf and say, hey, that doesn't represent the Nebraskans I know. And so I'll say that. Go to the map, but I heard Patrick set down the tone earlier, so I'm going to follow his footsteps on that.
Well, no, he's going to edit the video.
It's Elijah, that's so not happening.
But we got to push back on that one, because I think there's too many people hurting. Thank you very much.
Everyone, I'm so glad that you all were able to make it, and so glad to receive all of your comments. It's all very much appreciated. In the spirit of Shelley, do we have anyone who would be willing to approve the minutes?